Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about non-expository Arcanum lore. This is a companion video to the non-expository Fallout lore that I did a while back, where Fath Daniel asked, what is Arcanum non-expository lore? And I thought, yeah, I should do that because that makes sense, and it's something that, it's interesting. It was harder for me to do this for Arcanum than for Fallout. And because Fallout was a smaller game in sense of scope, number of NPCs, number of dialogues, cutscenes, in-game books. So it was harder for me to find Arcanum lore that had never appeared in the game already. Like there's a cutscene that mentions the lore, or an NPC talks about it at length. And we had several NPCs that could talk about a lot of lore that you may not know because it was hidden behind a speech skill, or you had to have a certain reactivity level with them, or you just never dove down in their dialogue tree to find it. And then there were lots and lots and lots and lots of books. So I tried to find lore for Arcanum to answer Fath Daniel's question that I don't see it online. I'm pretty sure the game never dove into it. And as far as I'm concerned, this is canon. Although technically, since I don't own the IP, it's not legally canon. But like the non-expository Fallout lore, this is stuff that the team that made Arcanum assumed was true when we wrote everything. So let's dive into it. First one, magic goes in cycles. It increases and decreases in power naturally. Nobody knows why, and the cycles are over tens or hundreds of thousands of years from peak to peak. The game does mention quite frequently that magic used to be more powerful in the past. However, I don't think it ever explicitly mentioned the cycle. And even if it did, I don't think it ever went into details, because the cycle has been occurring over the last millions of years. The cycle has happened over and over and over and over, where magic goes way up to just crazy, insane power, and then comes back down and troughs to nothing, no magic at all, and then goes back up. Currently, Arcanum takes place where magic has dropped about 30 to 40% of its power level. To give you an idea, at its highest point, the magic colleges were supposed to have 10 spells each, and there were also more colleges than the game presented. Meanwhile, at its lowest point in the cycle, magic drops to 0. There's no magic in the world. It's like this world. There are no magic. There are no magical creatures. That includes all non-humans, like elves and orcs, and magical creatures like vampires and zombies and dragons. They're all gone. Here's a huge mystery that we knew we'd have to solve, but we didn't. How do those creatures come back? When the magic starts to go back up, where do they come from? If they all died off or disappeared, how do they come back? Now, related to this, tech also goes in a cycle. Tech gets really high powerful and tech gets low. However, it's not for any underlying reason. Magic literally goes up and down in power. So at the time of Arcanum, you could not cast a level 10 spell in a college. They effectively didn't exist, and even if you did find one, you wouldn't be able to throw it. But tech goes in a cycle that's opposite to magic because of magic. Because when magic increases, there's less and less reason for tech. When things can be teleported to a destination, you don't need a railroad. When everybody can teleport, you don't need any kind of railroad or steam engines or horses. You can just take things. If using steam power to mine minerals, well, if everybody just can summon minerals out of thin air, you don't even need mines anymore. You don't need tech. When magic's at its peak, you don't need tech. And when magic goes away completely, you need tech to do everything. So magic naturally cycled. Tech was connected to that, but not for any underlying reason other than magic When magic is powerful, you don't need tech. Now, at its height for technology, similar to magic, there were a lot more degrees in every tech discipline and far, far, far more disciplines. When I said there were more colleges, there are a few more colleges of magic when it's peak. But when tech is at its peak, there are way more disciplines. I mean, I think Arcanum went up to electric. But if you want to think about what tech could go to, you have nuclear, fusion, quantum, quasi-matter, higher dimensions. These are all things tech would get into later. And just to put that into perspective, Vendigroth, which was presented as a really high-tech civilization, the Vendigroth waste, that because they got wiped out and magic users were like, we're not having any of this tech stuff. Vendigroth wasn't anywhere close to the peak of where technology could go. Some other lore. There are other continents in the world, and the game kind of mentions them. We had talked about them, but we never expressed that lore in the game. I can tell you that none of the other continents were undergoing an industrial revolution. They were just in waning magic, but tech really hadn't exploded there. Tech was exploding on the continent you were on because of Gilbert Bates and the whole thing with the dwarves and all that. That's, in fact, why you were supposed to be coming there. The opening thing is your character came to this continent looking for work because there was just a lot of work to be had. The economy was booming because of the Industrial Revolution, but that also meant for the things that tech couldn't do yet, if you mine a bunch of ore and some of it really needs to get somewhere quickly, a magic user can teleport it for it. So magic was kind of booming too. The economy was basically booming for magic and tech. Quick dive into the ancient gods. The game goes into the Age of Legends and talks about the ancient gods. I think there were a dozen of them. What it doesn't go into is we had imagined that there were equivalents to these gods, but enemies of them. So in other words, bad versions on their level. We didn't explore this at all. When you go to the Void, there was some hint at this, but there was nothing that basically we were going to get into in the game, so we didn't dive into it. However, one thing we had agreed on is there was something higher than them, higher than the ancient gods, that they were absolutely terrified of. And I'm not talking about Valorian the Allfather. Something higher than him. They didn't speak of it, him, her, they didn't speak of it in fear of gaining its attention. In my mind, I thought of this as the elder gods were these super powerful beings that had created a little playground. And some of their friends, bad friends, had come over and they're like, stay away from our playground. And that were the enemies of their power level. But somewhere out there was something way above them. And they didn't want that. They didn't want that thing to come over and mess up their playground or take over their playground or make them get rid of their playground. Don't know what the answer is there because we never explored it. But we'd always thought, okay, there are levels of things. There's something above the ancient gods. Quick thing about races. There's a lot of discussions of races, and it came up in all kinds of ways because Arcanum tried to express racism through the actual upper and lower class standing of races in Arcanum. One of the things we agreed on is if you look at there's a treatise by someone, there's a book out there that talks about how all the median races, those are roughly man-sized, can interbreed. So orcs, elves, and humans. Well, there are half-elves and half-orcs, which are humans interbreeding with the other two. But elves and orcs, we never talked about an elf-orc combo. It can happen. There's no reason they can't interbreed, but it never happens. We were going to go into things about why elves would always stop this in horrific ways. And most orcs wouldn't want it either. So you might have occasionally an orc trying this. It's not going to work. I don't want to talk about it anymore, but we agreed it can happen, but it never, ever does. Related to that, if you ever did the gnome quest that led to where half-ogres are created on Half-Ogre Island, which really needed a better name than Half-Ogre Island, let me just say here, the gnomes were involved in far, far worse things than that. Because if you look at my games, they have a theme to them. I have a whole video called My Games Theme. The one theme that runs through all my games, and that is power corrupts. Institutions that gain power corrupt those people who are in charge of those institutions. It's a theme of all my games. And it was a theme in Arcanum as well. And my notes on this are really sparse, but one of them involved kites. You know those little short cobalt-like things? They lived in forests. They would always attack. I don't even think they could talk, but I don't really remember. One of the experiments, one of the things the gnome were doing involved kites. And that's as far as I'm getting into it. I had some ideas of what it would be, but there was nothing actually written other than, besides half ogres, they were doing something with kites. And they were doing far, far worse things too. We didn't actually go into it. Basically, the bottom line is gnomes tended to have a lot of money. Especially the richest people on the planet, many of them were gnomes. They were funding all kinds of illicit experiments. Let your imagination run wild. Okay, so that's most of the non-expository lore I could find. I'm going to add one more that I'm not going to say the whole team, but me. If I had my way, that ore in Arcanum 2, the one that was mentioned that could combine magic and tech, that wasn't real. It was a complete myth. Maybe it was a fabrication to try to get people to come down and explore those underground caverns. Maybe someone just made it up. Maybe an experiment was wrong and it seemed like magic and tech could be combined, but they were completely wrong. I didn't like the idea. I didn't want that idea to go forward. Had I continued, I would have tried to make that ore not be a real thing. So don't know if that means kind of quasi-canon or canon according to Kane, but that ore, gone. Anyway, that's all the lore I could find. Spent a few hours looking online in my notes. That's all the lore I could find that was not ever explicitly gone into detail in Arcanum. So, Fath Daniel, I hope you like that answer.